Welcome to this side of time. We are discussing D-Day. We have discussed D-Day in Lagos. So on this edition, we'll discuss D-Day in Ibadan, in Enugu and Kaduna. If we are not able to conclude, we'll continue on Tuesday next week. D-Day, the day of action, the day they struck. That is D-Day. It was a tough day. Did they meet their Waterloo? What are the lessons to learn from their encounters? D-Day. In Lagos, they did not succeed. In Lagos, Major Okafor could not get the GOC of the army, Major General Agui Ironsi. On D-Day in Lagos, Major Okafor missed his two targets. His responsibility was to get Brigadier May Malari. Okafor missed him. His responsibility was to arrest the GOC of the Nigerian army. Okafor again missed him. He missed Mamalari, but Ifajuna caught up with Mamalari and took care of him. If the argument of Adewale Ademulegun in his book, Why We Struck, is anything to go by, the failure of the January 1966 revolution stemmed from the inability of Major Okafor to complete his task. D-Day, a day that changed everything. Take your mind back. The term D-Day is mostly famously associated with the Normandy landings on the 6th of June, 1944, during World War II. It was used for many amphibious landings and military operations, both before and after that historic event, the World War. So in the context of our discussion on the January 15th, 1966 coup, referring to the day as the D-Day of the operation is an appropriate use of the military terminology, as the young majors would have undoubtedly used such planning designations themselves. Look at what Adewale Ademulegun said here. If you turn to page 148 of his book, he asked questions. And when I look around the country, when I examine contemporary politics, I still hear some activists, some researchers, some public affairs commentator also raising the same questions. Look at this. Adewale Ademulegun says the fourth reason for the failure of the revolution was that Nigeria was not yet ready for it. This was easy to see. The preponderance of reaction in the army simply reflected the preponderance of reaction in the country. Those army officers who worked resolutely to destroy our revolution were typical Nigerians. Who is a typical Nigerian? Ademulegun says they were very much like their civilian counterparts, but the young officers were different. They were enthusiastic for change, and they would carry on the revolutionary flame as long as they were rightly channeled along the path of it. That was the reason why I was confident that we would have succeeded if we had fought from Kaduna. We would then have eliminated both the men and forces of opposition and revision. It was also for this reason that Nzogu declared that we were prepared to lose 1 million men to ensure the success of our revolution. We would certainly have won, even if we had to sacrifice a lot. To succeed in such a circumstance in their own country, Russians, with only about twice the Nigerian population, sacrificed more than 2 million people. China, in their own turn, sacrificed several millions. Here, he refers to Mao Zedong Cultural Revolution. He says, leaving the army officers alone, why was it that the average Nigerian was concerned first and foremost for himself and next for his family? Why was it that the usual attitude of the Nigerian is to grab and grab and grab? Why was it that the Nigerian does not care about things that did not touch him personally? Why the people on top used their power to benefit themselves and their families? Why did the people below aspire to do no more than get to the top, simply to follow suit? These are fundamental questions that Ademulegun has raised in his book, Why We Struck. It is the story of the first Nigerian coup. So this book is a primary text for this class. It is a class of history, politics, and power. And for this class, for the subject we are treating, this book is fundamental to having a deeper understanding of what happened on the 15th of January, 1966. Not just what happened. What inspired the revolutionaries? The foundation of this analysis is based on deep principles. We enunciated that principle on Tuesday. And it's time to recall the principle, using the principle to explain the behavior of man. In this case, the behavior of Ademulegun, Nzogu, Ifajuna, Nwobosi, Major Chukwuka, Major Anuforo. A man will reach goodness by purifying himself. And he can only do this by pursuing a process of self-examination and self-analysis. The selfishness must be discovered and understood before it can be removed. Selfishness is powerless to remove itself, neither will it pass away of itself. Darkness ceases only when light is introduced, so ignorance can only be dispersed by knowledge. Selfishness will be dispersed by love. A man must first of all be willing to lose himself before he can find himself. A man must first of all be willing to lose himself before he can find himself. He must realize that selfishness is not worth clinging to, that it is a master altogether unworthy of his service, and that goodness alone is worthy to be enthroned in his heart as the master of his life. That is the principle behind this analysis. And we broke down the principle in the last edition of the show. We'll continue in that path, extending the explanation of the principle to broader human forms. On state affairs, discussion gets so deep that they become philosophical. They become inspirational. And as you are motivated to thrive towards goodness, towards understanding the past, you must open your mind to the events that will come tomorrow due to the actions of today. Remember, to every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. Remember, garbage in, garbage out. What you sow, ye shall reap. Did Nzogu and Co. sow wind and reaped wild wind? The analysis will help us understand. Remember, reading is feeding the mind. And on this edition of the program, we'll continue with the exercise of reading. It is therapeutic. Reading refreshes the mind and inspires. It educates. It broadens understanding. So in your search for the goodness of life, search for knowledge. The January 15, 1966 Coup is a lesson written in blood. As the sun rose over Lagos on the morning of the 16th of 1966, Nigerians saw a new politics. You could call it a new world. The familiar landmarks remained. Yeah, the trees were still standing. They even swayed. The markets still buzzed. But one thing was clear. The architecture of power had collapsed. The Prime Minister was gone. When Ifajuna got the sign that the coup in Lagos was failing, by this time, he had already arrested the Prime Minister, Tafawa Balewa, and was driving with him. At some point, he decided to go it alone. But he had Major Okafor in the car, So when they got to a point on the Lagos Ibadan Express Road, approaching Ota, Ifajuna stopped the car, marched the Prime Minister into the bush, and shot him. The Saudana was gone. Kaduna Nzogu carried out the action against the Saudana. The nation was adrift. In the years that followed, as the bodies piled up and the dreams turned to ash, a question would haunt those who remembered. Could it have been different if the leaders of the First Republic has learned to see beyond their regions, if they had enthroned divine goodness instead of personal ambition, could the darkness have been avoided? If the young majors had paused in the weeks before that fateful night to examine their own hearts, to ensure that their revolution was born of love rather than anger, of national unity rather than ethnic grievance, could they have found a way to bring light without blood? So the principle we talk about answers with a gentle but unyielding truth. Remember, a man must first of all be willing to lose himself before he can find himself. On January 15th, 1966, too many men were still seeking themselves, and Nigeria, the nation they all claimed to love, was the sacrifice. See, let's read. We'll turn now to page 113 of the book, Why We Struck. Ibadan. Ibadan. Yes, we are streaming from Ibadan, the capital of Oyo State in Nigeria. Let's go to D-Day in Ibadan, as told by Ademulegun. He says, now, our loss of ground and power in Lagos had not actually been repeated anywhere else. Our original plan did not include the takeover of the 5 existing governments of the Federation and the appointment of governors in Ibadan, Enugu, Benin, and Kaduna. That would have been a continuation of the status quo, which we did not want. Our real aim was to knock off the existing government and immediately split the country into smaller units with a more powerful government in the center. Their idea was to break up the regions and split the country into smaller units with a powerful center. Is that not what we have now? That's what we have now. But remember, Awolowo also advocated for a similar stuff, that the North was too big, that the minorities needed their own states in the East and in the West. But the Midwest was carved out of the West. And members of the action group would ask, why just the Western region? Why not the Eastern region? Why not the Northern region? Could it be that the government at the center just wanted to whittle down the power of Awolowo to reduce its influence, and therefore the Midwest was carved out of the Western region. Remember, after the counter-coup, why the discussions to prevent the war that was coming were going on, the military head of state at the time, Yakubu Gowon, created 12 states out of the regions. So here, Adewale Ademoyega said that their real aim was to knock off the existing government and immediately split Nigeria into smaller units with a more powerful government in the center. So their intention in the coup was not to take over the government of the eastern region, the western region, the northern region, and the Midwest. That wasn't their focus. He says the orders were not given to our colleagues in Ibadan, Enugu, and Benin to take over the government or make radio announcements. This was the reason why Nzogu, who had unqualified success in Kaduna, did not rush to make any announcement over the radio. He said Nzogu had unqualified success in Kaduna, but he did not rush to make any announcement. The all-important and only radio announcement was to have come from Lagos. It was because we failed to make the announcement in Lagos and Ironsi came on the air with a contrary announcement that Nzogu had to act for the revolution by making his own announcement later in the day in Kaduna. Is Adewale Ademoyega telling us that Nzogu hurriedly wrote his broadcast that day? Adewale Ademoyega was supposed to have made the announcement from Lagos. That was part of his duty on the D-Day. But because they did not succeed in Lagos, no coup broadcast was made from Lagos. He makes the point that Ironsi had countered them with his own broadcast. And having heard Ironsi's broadcast, Nzogu had to make his own broadcast, but that wasn't the original plan. Ademoyega says, it is essential to be clear on this point before examining the success of the Ibadan and Enugu operations. The unit that operated for us in Ibadan left Abeokuta around midnight. It consisted of 2 officers and 21 other ranks. They traveled in a Land Rover and a 3-tonner. They had written orders to arrest both Chief Akintola and his deputy, Chief Fani Kayode. Having made Ibadan before the HR, which was 0200, they disrupted both the telephone communications and the electric power supply. Have you noticed something? That the executioners of coup always want to cut off communication systems. Did that also affect them in Lagos? They cut off the communication system, and when they needed to communicate with each other, they could not communicate with each other. So when the team that got to Ibadan got to town, they cut off the communication system. It says at HR, they were at the house of Chief Fani Kayode. Chief Fani Kayode was the deputy premier of the Western region. He was the father of Femi Fani-Kayode. At the HR, they were at the house of Chief Fani-Kayode. Having gained entry into the house, they summoned the deputy premier, who surrendered to them without a fight. Take note, he surrendered to them without a fight. Don't forget the rule of the game. There is a rule of engagement. Orders were given. Arrest. Shoot only when the person resists arrest. That was the rule of engagement. He says, having gained entry into the house, they summoned the deputy premier, who surrendered to them without a fight. Fani-Kayode came towards the soldiers with both hands up and shouting, "I surrender. Don't kill me. I beg. Don't kill me." The soldiers started to ask themselves if that was really the man called Fani Pa. They were surprised that he was so calm and was begging, because the picture of Fani Pa in the politics of the Western region was the picture of a rugged politician. He doesn't broach opposition. He took on Obafemi Awolowo fiercely. He was a man of brutal action, according to some analysts. But here, the same Fani Pa was begging, "Don't kill me." So the officers looked and said, "Is this the real Fani Pa? The powerful Fani Pa?" Those who knew him confirmed that he was. As in all other cases, the soldiers had orders not to kill anybody who surrendered. So they took him away under arrest. From the story told here, and from the story told in other books, the men in action kept to the rule of engagement, except when those that were targets resisted arrest. However, did Tafawa Balewa resist arrest? He was arrested. Why was he shot? Why? Did Festus Okotiebo resist arrest? Why was he shot? What about Lagema, Shudendi, Ademulegun? It is the story of time. It is the story of power. The officers wanted to grab power and run with her, but they crashed. Let's read on. As in all other cases, the soldiers had orders not to kill anybody who surrendered. So they took him away under arrest. Later, they were at the Premier's lodge. They tried to use the same method to arrest Chief Samuel Akintola, but Akintola gave them a fight and opened fire on them, wounding the unit commander, Captain Nwobusi, and his second in command. Akintola shot at Captain Nwobusi, wounding him. Did that generate anger in the wounded officers that they opened fire sporadically on Akintola's location? It says, in the melee that followed, Chief Akintola was shot. Captain Nwobusi had been ordered to bring his unit's 100 mm pack howitzer with some live rounds to Lagos after his Ibadan operation, so as to support us in our Lagos operations. Nwobusi acted accordingly. He ordered one of his sergeants to return to Abeokuta and collect the gun, plus live ammunition and a team of 12 gunners. They were to report to the 2nd Battalion Barracks Ikeja. They have finished their operation in Ibadan. They got their men, and now they are moving to Lagos to support the Lagos end. But because there was no communication, they didn't know what was happening in Lagos. By this time, the coup was failing in Lagos. But they were in high spirit. They've done their job in Ibadan. And they have arrested Fani Kayode, and he was even in the car. They were now driving to Lagos to go and support the Lagos guys. Nwobusi acted accordingly. He ordered one of his sergeants to return to Abeokuta and collect the gun, plus live ammunition, and a team of 12 gunners. They were to report to the 2nd Battalion Barracks Ikeja. The sergeant did exactly as he was commanded. But when he arrived at the Ikeja cantonment with his crew, they were all arrested. Before then, Captain Nwobusi himself and his second in command and a few soldiers had driven straight from Ibadan to Lagos in the Land Rover. Remember, Nwobusi had his target. He has accomplished his task, and he has sent some of his men to Abeokuta to go get some guns and ammunition and meet him in Lagos. So he moved ahead of them. Captain Nwobusi himself and his second in command and a few soldiers had driven straight from Ibadan to Lagos in the Land Rover. They took the arrested Chief Fani Kayode with them. They made straight for the Federal Guards Officers' Mess, Ikoyi, arriving there at about 7 o'clock in the morning. Unfortunately, they landed into the hands of Ironsi's troops and were all arrested. Later, their own captive, Chief Fani Kayode, was released by the reactionaries backing Ironsi. Can you see the power of communication? They have disabled the communication facilities, and they didn't communicate to themselves. But were there no signals? Because if they communicated well, perhaps they would have succeeded. Why the coup was failing in Lagos? Nzogu has done his job in Kaduna. Nwobusi has succeeded. How come they were not communicating? Because it took about 3 days before Ademulegun could even reach Kaduna and Nzogu. And by this time, Kaduna and Nzogu was thinking that they had all been killed in the failed Lagos coup. Because that was the news that got to Kaduna and Nzogu. That Ademulegun, Ifajuna had all been arrested and killed in Lagos. So by this time, Kaduna and Nzogu was feeling alone, that other revolutionaries were dead. And he became weak, and that's how they penetrated him. There are lessons to learn from here. lesson written in blood. The annals of history are filled with the blueprints of nations taking different paths to development. Sometimes we celebrate the architects of these physical and political structures that have created advanced nations. Sometimes we celebrate the generals that have lifted their countries. We talk about the orators, the lawmakers that have written constitutions for their countries. Yet, for every nation that has risen to illuminate the world, countless others have crumbled, not from external invasion, but from internal decay. The majors, the young majors, wanted to fight internal decay. Their walls were strong, but their souls were weak. How? There is an older, more fundamental blueprint for national development, one that doesn't begin in parliament, but in the human heart. We neglect that in this part of the world. That is why leadership in Africa does not come with the depth of mind. It is the depth of mind that leads to innovation and advancement of nations. The human heart, call it the mind if you like. Remember, there is an older, more fundamental blueprint for national development, one that doesn't begin in a parliament, but in the human heart. It is an admonition that speaks not to the learned, but first and foremost to the leaders, suggesting that the cornerstone of any great civilization is not granite, but character. We pay little attention to the character of those that govern in this part of the world. And since we have neglected the essence of good character as fundamental to national development, we pay the horrible price. Remember the principle of the program. A man will reach his best by purifying himself, and he can only do this by pursuing a process of self-examination and self-analysis. If you want good, you must be good. If you want good, you must be good. He that comes to equity must come with clean hands. You cannot sow purple and reap orange. It is against natural laws. Every country deserves the leadership they get. The banditry, the terrorism you see in Nigeria is a manifestation of the character of the leadership of Nigeria. Bad character in, bad character out. Corruption in, bandit out. Remember, he that comes to equity must come with clean hands. A man must first of all be willing to lose himself. That thing that excites you, oh, I like this food and I cannot resist eating this food. Anytime I see it, I must eat it. That means it's the food that controls your mind, not your mind controlling what you eat. In that case, you have not been able to find yourself. I love beer. I must drink it every day. If you are not able to discipline yourself, you cannot discipline a nation. That is why those who lead must first get involved in deep contemplation, self-analysis, and purify their mind. By purifying their mind, they will attract pure things. Because they attract pure things, their nations will advance. So when you hear banditry, when you hear terrorism, it is the output of our input as a nation. Let's read on. Unfortunately, Nwobosi and Co. landed into the hands of Ironsi's troops and were all arrested. Later, their own captive, Chief Kayode, was released by the reactionaries. How do you feel? Do you feel for them? Leave your comment. I want to read your comment after the show. Do you feel for them? Did you support what they do or what they did? Are you happy with the actions they carried out? Let me know what you think. Leave your comments. Are you saying, if they had done this, if they had done that, that means you wanted them to succeed, right? That is Ibadan. But I want to read from another book. I have two books here that talks about Akintola. S. Ladoke is one of the best books on Akintola. In fact, it is the most authoritative work on Akintola. S. Ladoke, His Life and Times. It's a book written by Professor Akinjide Oshutokun. It is the story of Akintola comprehensively written, authoritative, provocative, deeply researched. The professor did a good job here. S. Ladoke, Akintola, His Life and Times. I recommend this book to you. Read it. We are not reading from this book today. We will do in subsequent editions. Here is another good book on Akintola. This one is titled Samuel Ladoke, Akintola in the Eyes of History, written by Femi Kende. Femi Kende is a deep historian, always excavating hidden facts about life, places, and men. And he did exactly that in this book. Samuel Ladoke, Akintola in the Eyes of History. I have interviewed the author of this book, and I advise that you scroll down the channel and find the interview on Akintola. It's a comprehensive interview. The interview is on the channel. In that interview, we discussed this book. I think that interview was in 2024. It's a 2024 interview. We discussed this book, and more secrets were revealed in that interview. So look for the interview. Now let's read from this book, Femi Kende's book. Did Akintola see the signs of his death? Was death knocking and Akintola opened? Did Akintola see death coming? Death knocking and Akintola opened the door. Let's read. I want to read from page 172 of Femi Kende's book, Samuel Ladoke Akintola in the Eyes of History. He said on the 26th of October 1965, exactly 2 weeks after the general election, Akintola lost his most cherished daughter and confidant, Omodele. Omodele died apparently and perhaps as a result of an overdose of sleeping pills. After Omodele's death, Akintola was beginning to have a second thought about his ability to continue with the crisis in the Western region and asked rhetorically whether the whole warfare was worth it at all. Being a soft man, he had even contemplated resigning his position and leaving the affairs of the West to Chief Remi Fani-Kayode, his deputy, who was generally believed to be strong, toughened, and hardened. Faderera, Samuel Ladoke Akintola's wife, has also suggested this to him, insisting Ladoke was too feminine for the battle. It was apparent then that Ladoke Akintola was greatly distressed. According to one of the sentries at the government house, Mr. Olabode, a regional police officer attached to the government's lodge, the premier was in a state of utter confusion, and after meetings, however late, we still travel to Ogbomoso to sleep and come back to Ibadan in the morning. Ladoke Akintola was from Ogbomoso, in present-day Oyo State, then in the Western region. Femi Kende continues in his book. The premier's driver confided in the young police officer, Olabode, that the premier was fond of this trip because the late night trip from Ibadan afforded him the opportunity of a thoughtful silence and a deep sleep. Prince Adewale Kazeem, another known confidant of the premier, also noticed a premier whose hands were shivering and could no longer append his signature on a straight line. The crisis was overwhelming. It was the crisis in the Western region, in Yoruba land, that led to Nigeria's first military coup. It was a power struggle between the leader of the action group, Obafemi Awolowo, and his deputy, who was the premier of the Western region, that led to Operation Wetier. Due to the power struggle, Ladoke Akintola aligned with the North and formed a party, the Nigeria National Alliance. He left the action group. He formed his own party that later aligned with the MPC in the North to form the NNA. In the book, Samuel Ladoke Akintola in the eyes of history. The author says, Prince Adewale noticed this again and advised the Premier, Baba, why don't you resign? And the soberly Premier replied, Adewale is in Yoruba, meaning Adewale, it is too late to resign. It is only death that will end this feud, Akintola said. Can you see the power of books? They say if you want to hide something from a black man, put it in a book. Though I disagree with that. I don't agree with that. Because if you put it in a book, I will find it. I will find it. It will take me time, but I will find it. I'm a finder of information. I will find it. Except that book is not within reach. Say, Akintola says, it is too late. It is only death that will end this feud. Because I asked Femi Kehinde, who did you speak with while writing this book? And I discovered he engaged in deep research and contemplation to even interpret some of the actions. It's a good book. Let's continue the reading. Prince Duni Oyewumi, now the Shon of Ubomosho, okay, by the time he wrote this book, he was the Shon of Ubomosho, but now there is a new Shon. Prince Duni Oyewumi, now the Shon of Ubomosho, another confidant of the Premier, was around this period, running regular emissaries between the Premier and the Premier of the Northern Region, Sir Ahmadu Bello. Chief Samuel Ladoke Akintola was in this state of disillusionment when on the 14th of January 1966, he asked his aide, R.A. Obaleke, upon resumption of duty, to get prepared for a trip to Kaduna. There was a plane already waiting for them at the Ibadan airport, arranged from Lagos. On the Premier's entourage to Kaduna were Chief Lekon Salami, Alhaji Lamidi Adedibu. You see, when you come to Ibadan, one name is popular, Lamidi Adedibu. They used to call him the strong man of Ibadan politics. You can see he was around for a long time. By 1965, he was already very close to power. So he followed Akintola to the meeting with the Premier of the Northern Region. Also part of the Premier's entourage was R.A. Obaleke, N.A.B. Kotoye, and a host of others to meet with the Premier of the Northern Region, Sir Ahmadu Bello. At this meeting at the Premier's Lodge at Kaduna, the two Premiers went into a long private session. Before the commencement of the meeting, Premier Ladoke Akintola had given some money to his personal assistant, R.A. Obaleke, to buy some books for him at the bookshop. After a long while, Obaleke came back to still find the two Premiers in a very serious dialogue. Obaleke informed the Premier of the need to go back to Ibadan in a good time because there was no night landing facility at the Ibadan airport. Premier Ladoke Akintola immediately proceeded to the Kaduna airport and was seen off by his host, the Premier of the Northern Region, Sir Ahmadu Bello. On arrival in Ibadan, the Premier and his entourage proceeded to the Premier's lodge. The Premier's cook, Efyong, a Calabar man, provided dinner for the Premier before their departure, I mean, Calabar has always been around. The premier's cook was a Calabar man. What is it about Calabar and cooking? Akintola's cook was a Calabar man called Effiong. He provided dinner for the premier before their departure. On the 14th of January 1964, the premier had earlier told his wife to proceed to Ogbomoso to prepare their Ogbomoso residents for a private visit of Emperor Haile Selassie of Ethiopia. Now, look at what is going on here. That period, Nigeria hosted the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting. So Haile Selassie and other leaders were in Nigeria. So Haile Selassie was billed to visit Akintola in Ogbomoso. I remember that Haile Selassie also visited the then Ooni of Ife, because I interviewed the son of the Ooni of Ife. He told me how Haile Selassie was received in the Ooni's palace during that period. So on the 14th of January, Akintola was preparing to receive Haile Selassie, the Prime Minister of Ethiopia. Have you read about him? You know, some call him the conquering lion of the tribe of Judah. You know, Rastafarians love Haile Selassie. His real name was Rastafari. That was his real name. It was when he became emperor, he became Haile Selassie. But his real name is Rastafari. So that is why if you see Rastafarians, they see their origin, their home as Ethiopia. That is why Ethiopia is a country of ancient civilization. Ethiopia remains that African country that was not really colonized. So by the time the League of Nations was formed in 1918, Ethiopia was a member of the League of Nations. But after that, Italy made attempts to capture Ethiopia, to colonize it. So the government of Benito Mussolini, the fascist government of Italy, invaded Ethiopia to capture Ethiopia. They captured Ethiopia for about 3, 4, 5 years. But Haile Selassie, who went into exile at that point, did not stop the campaign against the forces. Ethiopia fought back, and Italy was ordered out of Ethiopia, and Ethiopia regained her autonomy. Let's read on. On the 14th of January 1964, the Premier had earlier told his wife to proceed to Ogbomoso to prepare their Ogbomoso residents for a private visit of Emperor Haile Selassie of Ethiopia. In the Premier's lodge were Yomi, his eldest son, and his wife Dupe, and their son Akinwumi, and Gbolahan Odunjo, Omodele's son, and the visiting Tokunbo Akintola, who came in on holidays from Eton College, London. It will be recalled once again that the British Prime Minister, Harold Wilson, at the Commonwealth Prime Ministers Conference in Lagos in January 1966, warned the host of the conference of an impending military insurrection and offered the Prime Minister, Tafawa Balewa, asylum in one of the British frigates on the Atlantic water. Are you in this class? Listen to this part again. It will be recalled once again that the British Prime Minister, Harold Wilson, at the Commonwealth Prime Ministers Conference in Lagos in January 1966, warned the host of the conference of an impending military insurrection and offered the Prime Minister Tafawa Balewa asylum in one of the British frigates on the Atlantic water. The Prime Minister rebuffed his intelligence report, and Akintola's report, fears and apprehensions, as mere hearsay and unfounded. So they were given information that something was going to happen. British intelligence. But Tafawa Balewa and Ahmadu Bello did not take that seriously. They didn't. Let's turn to page 177 of the book, Samuel Ladoke Akintola in the Eyes of History. This is the book we are reading from. Samuel Ladoke Akintola in the Eyes of History. Now let's look at how Akintola was killed. In the early hours of January 15, at about 2 a.m., and as predicted, the army struck like a thief in the night. The army mobilized from the Alamala Abeokuta garrison of the Nigerian Army. It was led by Captain Nwobosi to effect a change of government in the western region. The military officers, after picking Deputy Premier Fani Kayode, moved to the Premier's Lodge. At the Premier's Lodge, with their military trucks, they forcibly entered the lodge. The head of the sentries, Chief Inspector Shokumbi, immediately put off the floodlight and was chased by the soldiers. The officer manning the back of the Premier's Lodge, Police Corporal Bernard Olabode, was equally chased but was not discovered inside the drainage where he hid. The military officers immediately put off the electricity supply to the Premier's Lodge. The officer from the Ministry of Works posted to the Premier's Lodge, and whose responsibility was maintenance of the 2 generators at the Premier's Lodge, thought it was a power outage and immediately went to put on the manual generator, since the automatic generator could not come up immediately after the power outage. He was instantly shot on the forehead by one of the officers, and he died immediately. That's sad. The leader of the military officers shouted the name of the Premier. Akintola, come out. You are under house arrest. They also asked his deputy, already in their custody, to call him. Sir Ladoke Akintola, it is me. Fani Kayode, please come out. After hearing this voice, the Premier, who had immediately upon the arrival of the army officers, moved his family through the walkway from the official residence to his office in the Premier's Lodge, knew there was real and present danger. A maid of one of his children started crying, saying, Hey Joe, please, please. The outcry of this maid exposed the location of the Premier. There was then a gunshot from the premier to the rampaging soldiers. According to the police officer, Bernard Olabode, in his hiding location, he saw bullet shots going towards the premier's office. One of the shots hit the premier on the wrist, and the officers were still insisting that he must come out of hiding. They had promised to finish the entire family if he did not come out. For the safety of his children, the Ààrẹ Ọ̀nà Kakanfò of Yoruba land, Premier of the Western region, had no choice but to calm down. He was instantly arrested by the soldiers. The leader of the group, according to PC Olabode, asked Fani Kayode to identify the premier. Apparently, they didn't even know him. Fani Power identified him as the premier. According to Olabode, 2 officers were placed on his right and left hand, as if facing a firing squad, and volley of bullets were hurled at the premier. The first shot hit the premier on his forehead, some on his chest, and later the premier gave up. You see power game? You see power game. You see how it goes? The lessons we are learning today are lessons written in blood. So that was how Akintola was killed. And if you turn to page 179 of the book, Femi Kehinde said it was the end of an era. It was the end of an era. I will appreciate your comments. Let me know what you think. What lessons are you learning from the class? What lessons are you learning from the class? A lesson written in blood. So we have looked at D-Day in Lagos, D-Day in Ibadan. So we'll proceed to D-Day in Enugu. But the D-Day is the day in Kaduna. Kaduna became the epicenter. And Nzogu, this name, look at this name, Nzogu. A book written by Obasanjo. Nzogu. Obasanjo says here, with the final examination a few weeks away, the Reverend Fathers had a change of heart and decided to record the students on the condition that they apologized. Nzogu went to St. John's College in Kaduna. He had led a revolt in his final year, close to examination, and they were all suspended from school. So Obasanjo is saying here, with the final examination a few weeks away, the Reverend Fathers had a change of heart. It was a Catholic school run by Reverend Fathers. The Reverend Fathers had a change of mind and decided to record the students on the condition that they apologized. Why Chukwuma's colleagues, including his friend Christian Anuforo, apologized, the stubborn Chukwuma refused to apologize because he thought that he was fighting a just cause. So, he was left with no option but to prepare for his school certificate examination from home. Nzogu refused to apologize to the Reverend Fathers. Obasanjo says that Nzogu felt betrayed that his classmates who apologized for an injustice done to them, and he held the co-ringleaders in absolute contempt for their cowardice. This incident left an indelible impression on him. I read this part of the book to take you into the mind of this secondary school student that led the revolution later. What Obasanjo did with this book was to give us a biographical account of Chukwuma Kaduna Nzogu. He was born in Kaduna. His father and mother lived in Kaduna. In secondary school, he was already exhibiting the character of a military officer. He could scream, "Attention!" Obasanjo said he was already behaving like a military officer. You know, one of his co-conspirators was also his schoolmate, that is Christian Anufuru. They later planned the coup together. Don't worry, we will come to this book when we come to the Kaduna story of the D-Day. The alchemy of nations. A man must first of all be willing to lose himself before he can find himself. A man must be disciplined to attain purity of intention. That is why great leaders are philosopher kings. You must first purify your mind before you can lead a nation to advancement. To purify the mind is to acquire superior knowledge, understanding human behavior, and then you will know that great leadership does not require a magic wand. It is the simplest thing to do: to construct a road, to build airports, to build beautiful cities is the simplest thing to do. But it can only be done by those who have gone through deep self-examination and analysis. Read autobiographies of great leaders and then come back to me and see. Anywhere you see underdevelopment, the leadership of that entity has not gone through thorough self-examination. That is why a man must first of all be willing to lose himself before he can find himself. He must realize that selfishness is not worth clinging to, that it is a master altogether unworthy of his service, and that goodness alone is worthy to be enthroned in his heart. This is the ultimate, non-negotiable term of reference for authentic leadership. Kaduna Nzogu and Co. did not see that in the leadership of the time. The principle we enunciate here makes the point that the primary duty of a leader is not to build a nation, but to build a self worthy of building a nation. You cannot build a nation if you've not built yourself. So take note, one of the points to take home in this class is that the primary duty of a leader is not to build a nation, but to build a self worthy of building a nation. Did Tafawa Balewa have the quality? I have been reading Obafemi Awolowo's Contemplations. If you read his book, My Early Life, he took his time to describe how he was rebuilding his mind, the kind of books he read. So when I visited his mausoleum, I tried to spark a conversation with the spirit of Obafemi Awolowo to have a deeper understanding of his contemplations before his death. Did Awolowo speak to me? His daughter was there watching me having a conversation with somebody that she could not see. But I could see Awo, and there were whispers of the day. But let's leave that story for another time. It is the power of my mind. It is the vision of my soul. It is the work of my character. It is the intensity of my voice. It is about a tomorrow that we must build to have a great country. We deserve a great country of monumental development, and it is a task that must be done. And that is why we have this class. The primary duty of a leader is not to build a nation, but to build a self worthy of building a nation. It means leaders who build great nations are imbued with integrity, wisdom, and selfless service, from which alone a just and prosperous society can emerge. And I will not do good by not giving an example of such a leader. From third word to first, a book by Lin Kuan Yew. You always find this book on my table. I don't just read it as an autobiography. I read it as a book of philosophy for development. Philosophy for development. Lin Kuan Yew, he purified himself and therefore was able to purify a chaotic nation and transformed it from poverty to advancement, from third word to first. From third word to first. Singapore and the Asian Economic Boom, a book by Lin Kuan Yew. I recommend this book to you. Let's go to Enugu. What happened? Some have said it was an Igbo coup, that the coup did not take place in Enugu. Now, why was Michael Okpara left out? Remember, we have made the point that Chude Sokar, the revolutionary that was positioned to lead the coup in the southeast, was told to proceed on a training. So he was told to proceed to India on a training. And Adewale Ademulegun said, that became a headache for them. Who would take his place? So they hurriedly got somebody to take his place. But the person they found was a junior officer. Yet they believed he would carry out the action. So let's return to the book Why We Struck by Adewale Ademulegun. Let's read from page 115. Enugu is the subheading. The story of the Enugu operation was punctuated by a mishap. First, Lieutenant Oguchi did not leave Lagos on January 13th, as was previously planned. And it was because his military vehicle was not ready. Finally, he left on the 14th but suffered a breakdown on the way. He eventually arrived at Enugu in the early hours of the 15th. When he was supposed to be carrying out the coup, that was when he arrived Enugu. He was late. Is there conspiracy here? I heard somebody saying, why is it that his car broke down? Why him? Why did Kaduna Nzogu's car not break down? Okay, those are legitimate questions. He eventually arrived at Enugu in the early hours of the 15th. He had borne written orders with him from Lagos. However, on his arrival at Enugu, he found the final signal that ordered him to go ahead with the execution of the task. He organized a small body of troops. With a Land Rover and a 3-tonner. He sent a small detachment of the Eastern Nigerian Broadcast Service. He sent a small detachment to the Eastern Nigeria Broadcasting Service, ENBS. This detachment seized the station, stopped the normal program, and ordered the broadcasters to play only military music while awaiting latest news from Lagos. At the same time, Oguchi himself made for the Premier's lodge. Therein, he found that he had not only the Premier, Dr. Okpara, in his hands, but also an august visitor, Archbishop Macarius, the President of Cyprus, who, after the conclusion of the Commonwealth Prime Ministers' Conference in Lagos on January 12, had arrived in Enugu on the 13th on a state visit. With such a man of international repute present, Lieutenant Oguchi could do no more than bide his time. A couple of hours later, when the Archbishop had departed, he placed Dr. Okpara under house arrest, deploying his troops to guard the lodge. So they arrested Okpara the way they arrested Tafawa Balewa. But why did he place Okpara under house arrest? Why didn't he take Okpara away? Why didn't he take Okpara away? Why house arrest? Like Haile Selassie was going to visit Akintola, Archbishop Macarius, the Prime Minister of Cyprus, was already in Enugu visiting the Premier of the Eastern region. So when he got to the Premier's lodge and saw Archbishop Macarius, he did not strike immediately. He waited until Macarius left Enugu, and then he grabbed his man but placed him under house arrest. Then Oguchi himself went to the ENBS and made a tentative announcement that the army had taken over power. So outside the Nzogu announcement, Oguchi made announcements, but not as elaborate as that of Nzogu. He stopped at that while he awaited more news from Lagos. Later on, his own troops were replaced by those sent on Ironsi's orders. Because he was late, Ironsi had already taken back Lagos and now was in charge. He was now in charge. Later on, his own troops were replaced by those sent on Ironsi's orders, and Dr. Okpara was transferred to a prison detention. Ronsi had already sent soldiers to go and counter Oguchi. Oguchi was late for the operation. Ademulegun says because of his lateness to start, Oguchi had not yet sent troops to Benin before Ironsi's men took over Benin too. Because Oguchi was meant to arrest the premier of the eastern region, Michael Okpara, and arrest the premier of the Midwest region, Dennis Osadebe, another Igbo man. So that was how Enugu fell. So the next is Kaduna. You know, Kaduna is so elaborate, and I'm thinking that we should dedicate one edition to Kaduna. Yes. Because Kaduna action, there are lessons to learn from Kaduna action. We will dedicate a full edition to Kaduna, but let's start it. Let's start it. Adewale Ademulegun says our D-Day started earliest in Kaduna. Exercise Damisa, which had been organized for several weeks and rehearsed on the evening of January 13th, was finally staged. Essentially, Exercise Damisa was a night exercise aimed at capturing enemy objectives and holding the grounds captured. On the D-Day, the exercise was completed at about 1:30 hours. Then the officers were summoned and briefed about the political situation in the country. They were told about the decision of the revolutionary officers to bring the situation under control by a prompt military action which had been planned to be nationwide. The officers who hailed from every part of the country were given the option to participate in the action or withdraw. All of them enthusiastically volunteered to participate, and they were given specific orders as follows. Number 1, the arrest of the Northern Premier, the Sultana of Sokoto, and Alhaji Aliyu Makama Bida, the Northern Region Minister of Finance, was given to Nzogu and the captain. So Nzogu's duty in Kaduna was to arrest the Sultana of Sokoto, who also was the premier. He was also to arrest Alhaji Aliyu Makama Bida, the Northern Region Minister of Finance. Then Major Onwatuegu was to arrest the Northern Region Governor, Sakashim Ibrahim, and also arrest Brigadier Ademulegun. That was the duty of Major Onwatuegu. Captain Ude was to arrest Colonel R.A. Shudende. Captain Ude was to arrest Colonel R.A. Shudende. And the occupation of strategic locations in Kaduna was the duty of Captain Bullier and 6 subalterns. Captain Bullier, Ben Bullier wrote a book too on that day. I have not read his own book. I don't know why I have not seen his book. And I'm still looking for Ben Bullier's book. That's one book I have not read. Anyway, I can't read every book, but I'll try as much as possible to read relevant literatures for this class. The occupation of strategic locations was the duty of Captain Bullier. In addition, the Captain Bullier group had the task of informing the brigade headquarters staff officers of the coup to ensure their support. The staff officers included Major Alfonso Skeshi, the brigade major. After the orders, live ammunition was issued to all groups. Vehicles were allocated, and the groups dispersed to their various locations. The Nzogu group made for the Premier's Lodge. It was an impregnable castle with a massive iron gate fitted with automatic alarms. Because of this, 5 rounds of the 84mm Carl Gustav anti-tank recoil rifle had to be fired to destroy the gate and gain entrance into the lodge. During the firing of the Carl Gustav, the front part of the lodge caught fire. In spite of that, Ahmadu Bello the Premier resisted arrest and sought to escape from the building. In the scuffle that ensued, he was shot. He was shot. Ademulegun did not tell us who shot him, but Nzogu shot him. See these guys? You know Nzogu got injured that day. How did he get injured? He said, in spite of that, the Premier resisted arrest and sought to escape from the building. In the scuffle that ensued, he was shot. After that, the group made for the quarters of Alhaji Aliyu Makama Bida. He was missed altogether as he had traveled out of town. Next, the group went to the residence of Colonel Shudende. He resisted arrest and was shot. Then the group moved to the brigade headquarters to receive the reports of the remainder of the operation. Major Nzogu, who had been injured during the attack on the Premier's Lodge, was treated there. Soon, Major Onwatuegu reported to the headquarters with the arrested Governor Sir K. Kashim Ibrahim. Look at what Ademulegun said here. He said, soon, Major Onwatuegu reported to the headquarters with the arrested governor, Sir Kashim Ibrahim, who had conducted himself most gently and had been treated cautiously. He was detained at the headquarters for some hours, but was later allowed to go home. They allowed him to go home. He did not struggle with them. On the other hand, Brigadier Samuel Ademulegun was not brought to the headquarters under arrest. He had already been shot. He had already been shot. Okay. Now, I have interviewed the daughter of Brigadier Samuel Ademulegun. I'm talking about Sholakwe Ademulegun. On this channel, in our 2024 interviews, you will find the interview with Sholakwe Ademulegun. Listen, go and watch the interview. She gave a vivid description of what happened that day because she was in the same room with her daddy when Onwatuegu and his team came in. Her mother was in that room too. The three of them were lying on the bed. She was 6 years old at the time. Okay, let's hear part of that interview. Let's hear the narration of what happened on the 15th of January 1966. A story told by the Brigadier's daughter, Sholakwe Ademulegun. You have written a book entitled The Brigadier's Daughter. You noticed Timothy Onwatuegu.
Yes, I did.
They came in. What happened that night?
It is the story of a night that is still a nightmare in my head. So they came in, a bunch of soldiers with guns, Major Onwatuegu with them. They were talking to my father. As a 6-year-old, of course, I had no idea what they were talking about. History puts it that they were asking him for the keys to the armory. Since he was the commander of the 1st Division of the Nigerian Army, I guess the armory came under his garrison. They marched him out of the bedroom for a bit. I noticed my mother was talking and she was frantic. They marched him back. At a point, I noticed my father pulled the bedside drawer by the bed. Because I was lying, at that point I had rolled over to the edge to be able to see what was going on. History has it that he wanted to bring out his service pistol, rifle, whatever it's called. And the next thing I know, they cock their guns. My mother jumps in front of him with her arms, spread out like to protect him. And they rain the bullets. They rain the bullets. Blood everywhere. My mother was pregnant. It was more like they killed 3 people. Blood everywhere. Yeah. All over the floor, all over the walls.
We are talking about the January 15th, 1966 coup. This is the daughter of Brigadier Ademulegun, who was killed in that coup. You stood there watching.
Yes, I did. Yes, I did.
You saw Timothy Onwatuegu.
Yes, I did.
You knew him before that night.
Yes, I did.
He used to come to the house.
Yes, he did.
To do what?
Well, of course, my father was his commander. He would come. The army was one big happy family. At least up to that point, before that point. He would come. Sometimes they'd have lunch with us. I remember the dining room. The address was 1 Kashim Ibrahim, Street Road, Crescent in Kaduna. And it was the official quarters. And he was a regular visitor. Whether official or unofficial, he was uncle.
Kaduna Zogu was also a visitor.
Yes, he was. Yes, he was.
Kaduna was like the epicenter of that coup.
So history says.
Your mom jumped in between the gunmen and your dad.
Yes, she did.
You can still picture her?
Yes, I can. She was in a nightie. She was pregnant. So it was a loose gown. I think pink. And she stood there. Maybe she felt they would show some pity. I'm a woman. They would show some pity. They know me. They've come here. I've probably cooked for them before. Maybe she felt, because I'm pregnant, they would, whatever it was that she felt or was going on in her head, I don't know. But she stood there.
And they didn't feel pity for her?
No, absolutely not.
Did they tell her to give way and she refused?
I don't remember that. I don't remember that.
That is the Sholakwe Ademulegun story. She stood there as her father was shot by Onwatuegu. Onwatuegu did not only kill Brigadier Ademulegun, he also shot Sholakwe's mommy, who was pregnant, in that same room. You know, when Nzogu got Ahmadu Bello, Nzogu did not only take out Ahmadu Bello, Nzogu also killed Ahmadu Bello's wife because she was trying to save her husband. Should we say that these Coupists were ruthless in their approach? Remember, garbage in, garbage out. The counter coup that followed became bloodier. What lessons are we learning? What lessons? The same political issues that led to the coup keep reoccurring as we speak. Sholakwe Ademulegun has written the story of what happened that night in Kaduna. She has told her story in this book, The Brigadier's Daughter. She has told her story here. And this book is a lesson for any student of history. The Brigadier's Daughter, Samuel Ademulegun. You saw how Okafor missed Ironsi? Adewale Ademoyega says here that, on the other hand, Brigadier Ademulegun was not brought to the army headquarters under arrest. He had already been shot. Captain Bullie's group took control of all the strategic points in the city, including the local station of the Nigerian Broadcasting Corporation. The ammunition service depot was also taken over. Also taken over was the Northern Nigerian radio and television stations, the telephone exchange, the State House, and so on. In addition, they set up roadblocks on the various approaches to the town. Having done this, they contacted the staff officers of the brigade. Having done this, they contacted the staff officers of the brigade headquarters and informed them of the revolution, and at the same time requested their support. By the first light of January 15, Major Nzogu was in complete control, but there were still some unit commanders in the city and in Zaria and Kanu who were not part of the revolution and had yet to be contacted in order to know whether they would support the revolution. These included Major Alexander Madiebo of the Nigerian Army Artillery, Major Hansan Katsina of the Nigerian Reconnaissance Corps, and Lieutenant Colonel Bassi of the Nigerian Army Depot at Zaria, including Lieutenant Colonel Ojukwu of the 5th Battalion Kanu. It was Captain Bullie who had orders to contact Keshi, and it was the latter who contacted Madiebo. Madiebo later found that the subalterns of his own unit had already turned full-fledged revolutionaries. You know, I have made this point that Madiebo deserved to be court-martialed. On a good day, he should be court-martialed. Where was he when Nzogu commandeered his group, his team, that he was the commander? He didn't know that his team had joined Nzogu to carry out the coup plot. Therefore, Madiebo reluctantly gave his support, but was minded to fuel the revolution. If there is somebody that Ademulegun is so angry with in this book, it's Alexander Madiebo. From page to page, Ademulegun attacks Madiebo. It was Madiebo that convinced Nzogu to give up the coup. Ademulegun said Madiebo deceived Nzogu. Because by the time they had convinced him to surrender to Agui Ironsi, immediately he landed in Lagos. He was arrested and thrown into Kirikiri prison. To him, that was betrayal. But was Nzogu naive? The next edition on Tuesday will just be Nzogu. Was Nzogu naive? Because he had plans to march on Kanu to deal with Ojukwu. Ojukwu was not supporting the revolution. So Nzogu wanted to deal with Ojukwu. See, let me read here. I'll read a book. Remember, we have not read from this book. We have not read from this book by Madiebo. We are yet to read from this book. We will read from this book. Now, I want to read from this book. The Last Flight. The Last Flight. I just want to read some paragraphs from this book. Then on Tuesday, we'll continue. The Last Flight. A pilot remembers the Air Force and the Biafran air attacks. You know, this class we extend to the Civil War. We are going to study the Civil War in detail. The Civil War. Because this first coup led to the counter coup. The counter coup led to the pogrom. The pogrom led to the Civil War. We're going to study the Civil War. Look at what Captain August Okpe said here. Of course, August Okpe was a member of the Air Force. They were those that were trained in Canada, and they started Nigeria's Air Force. He would later find himself fighting for Biafra when the war ensued. In chapter 15 of his big book, that is page 181, he said the military revolution that took place in Kaduna on the 15th of January 1966 appeared initially to be hugely popular, and everyone seemed happy with the new scheme of things. Major Chukwuma Kaduna Nzogu and his inner circle group of officers were riding high, while the Air Force was not left out. The Air Force was not left out. In fact, Ademulegun argues that Nzogu had the Air Force behind him, and he was planning to use the Air Force to storm Lagos and deal with Ironsi. But he did not. Nzogu's point man in the Nigerian Air Force was Second Lieutenant Emeka Amuchienwa. Why all Igbos? Were they not Hausa officers in the Air Force? Why Amuchienwa? Amuchienwa did not hesitate to let us know who was in charge, August Okpe said. The following is a report submitted by the Nigeria Air Force Lance Corporal Anthony Alaribe to the Air Force section of the Eastern Command, Enugu, detailing what activities took place at the Nigerian Air Force Tactical and Training Wing, Kaduna, on the 15th of January 1966. Let's leave the report for now. We'll come to the report in subsequent editions of the program. But look at the point August Okpe makes here. He says Nzogu's control appeared to be holding, and in the interim, Captain Gordy Ude of the 3rd Battalion was dispatched with military escorts to go to 5th Battalion in Kanu by road to collect the necessary funds to pay the mutineering troops. Ojukwu was the head of the 5th Battalion in Kanu. And Nzogu needed money to pay his boys who were already on the field. And he needed the assistance of Emeka Ojukwu, who was in charge of the 5th Battalion in Kanu. Colonel Chukwuemeka Odumegwu Ojukwu, commander, 5th Battalion, did not see why he should comply with Nzogu's request if it was not endorsed by the army headquarters in Lagos. And he, indeed, went further to show his disapproval by immediately detaining Captain Ude that Nzogu sent. Nzogu sent Captain Ude to Ojukwu in Kanu. Ojukwu detained Captain Ude. When Captain Ude did not return, and the speculation then in the revolutionary camp was that foul play could not be ruled out, Major Obasanjo, not our Obasanjo, who was alleged to have represented that Ojukwu was well disposed to him, received Nzogu's brief to proceed to Kanu by Nigeria Air Force aircraft. Ojukwu had detained Ude, who traveled by road. Now Nzogu is now saying, okay, you fly now to Kanu and tell Ojukwu that I need money. He should break into the central bank and get me money. Accompanied by operating pilot, Lieutenant Daniel Suleiman. Now Suleiman was part of it. They took orders from Nzogu. And Jonathan Asen, Major Obasanjo was still to put across the same request for funds to pay the troops and as well resolve whatever problem that was delaying or preventing the return of Captain Ude. By this time, they didn't know that Ojukwu had detained Ude. Nzogu and his group had in effect asked Ojukwu to procure money from the Kanu Central Bank by any means at his disposal. Ojukwu here again and without hesitation ordered Lieutenant Ike Nwachukwu. You can see these names are popping up now. Ike Nwachukwu later became a major general. Ike Nwachukwu was reabsorbed into the Nigerian army after the war. Some of them were reabsorbed into the Nigerian army after the war. Here again and without hesitation, Ojukwu ordered Lieutenant Ike Nwachukwu, the officer in charge of Kanu Airport, to detain the officers that flew into Kanu and at the same time garrison the airplane with soldiers at the airport. So Ojukwu had detained Ude and had detained the Nigeria Air Force plane that Nzogu sent. Nzogu now sent another plane. Okay, we'll look at another plane. You see, this book is so detailed. When we come to the Nigerian Civil War, you see that this book is a classic. Classic in the sense that it gave a detailed description of the air war that happened, the last flight, one of the most authoritative work on the war. He fought the war. He fought the war. He flew some of the jets that Ojukwu wanted to use to bomb Lagos during the war. history. The last flight. A pilot remembers the Air Force and the Biafran air attacks. Captain August Okbe. The power of books. Knowledge is power. But the real power in knowledge is applied knowledge. It is significant to note that Emeka Ojukwu was playing the hardcore British bureaucrat who is forever waiting for instructions from Whitehall. In this case, as a loyal soldier and the product of a stable British system, Ojukwu wanted first to hear from Lagos. While he had every opportunity to align with the Nzogu clique, he did not cooperate since he was primarily loyal to the central government in Lagos. But I'm wondering, why Nzogu wanted to give orders to Ojukwu. Ojukwu was his senior. Ojukwu was his senior. But Nzogu was bold. You know, and some kind of boldness lead to death. Yes. Nzogu was bold. Obasanjo writes about Nzogu. Nzogu. Obasanjo says Chukwuma and his friend Christian sometimes went hunting with the Irish fathers. That was in secondary school. He went hunting with the Reverend Fathers that were the teachers in St. John's College in Kaduna. But he disliked, as a matter of principle, the favoritism they often showed towards certain students. They would shower them with gifts and even go as far as awarding them extra marks. Chukwuma did not hesitate to show his strong disapproval. He did not associate with students who curried favors. His friends were usually the more athletic, rugged, and independent-minded type. Obasanjo is describing his personality as a secondary school student in this book, Nzogu. I can see your comments. Omotayo Onobamiru says all those events were a sad chapter in Nigerian history. It was an end of an era, only for more sad chapters to open up in Nigeria's history. A comment says this is an interesting place to be. Thank you for being here. Yomite. Those barbaric killings were unfortunate. That's what Yomite is saying. This makes a lot of sense. I always wondered why Akintola opened fire on Nwobosi and his men when they came to arrest him, knowing it would lead to death. Viking Premier says 1966 coup plotters were wrong. History has proven it. Oba Kenzwa the Great of Benin was the arrowhead of the freedom of the Midwest region. Akimbola Onile says, Mr. Edmund, I'm enjoying the analysis and insightful history of the war. I have a copy of that book. Yes, I've read different books here today. Thank you for being part of it. Amika Cabral. Amika Cabral. I know you're not the real Amika Cabral, but that name rings a bell. Have you studied Amika Cabral? Read history. As you do your business, as you work, find time to read. Study Nigerian history and prepare for the redemption that will come. Redemption is on its way. We are learning from history, and we will redeem the land. Listen. Don't forget the purification of the self. Be the goodness that you want. It is a duty more demanding than any budget negotiation or military campaign. Purification of the self. It requires a rigorous, ongoing process of self-examination, self-analysis. A leader without this inner practice is like a captain who sets sail without ever checking his compass or the soundness of his hull. That leader is at the mercy of every gust of wind, the wind of public opinion, the wind of personal ambition, the wind of flattery and fear. That leader's decisions are not born of principle, but of impulse and self-preservation. That is what we've been having since the coup of January 1966. So the philosophical root of this ideal is about doing good for the common good. To serve a nation, a leader must first dethrone the tyrant within. This is the ultimate act of courage and the genesis of all lasting leadership. We will continue the class on Tuesday. I am Edmundo Pillow. Thank you for being there.